About Brexit, which is coming up, and what the effects might be. Are there any kind of UK European conventions which might survive sort of separation from it? Or does the border get moved back to Dover? Because I know I've had conversations with people during the last 2 years, so it's only our membership of the EU where the French have we've been able to put some influence on the French to actually do something, or at least react in some sort of way to it. Once we're out, then they could wave people through to us, really.
I don't know specifically about the border, but I know in terms of the Dublin Convention, where they bring children over, I think there's an amendment that's tabled at the moment for that, and I saw some of the MPs today trying to gather support for it on Twitter. Like celebrating people. It's 332, if that means anything to anybody. She's saying go and lobby your MP about 332 because it affects the children.
It's just one of the cut and paste bits that can come from legislation.
No, the Dublin Convention is if a child claims asylum in one of the European countries and they have a relative in the UK or any European country, they have the right to have their asylum claim heard in that country. So then the governments agree to swap the child from that country.
So European is a geographical concept rather than a political.
Yeah.
One, perhaps. Yeah.
Hi. My name's Sarah. I'm a student at Leicester University. I know just about to embark on a PhD. I know, I'm going. But my question is very child-focused. It's child-centred really. It's relative to once an unaccompanied child is here in the UK. Because during my journey of preparing some protocol that's going to do some good at the end of it, I found that actually what seems to be lost here is that we seem to forget about the child's mental health status enormously actually. So the fact that they're unaccompanied speaks volumes, that they're isolated, lonely, grieving, and all of those things really, again, also I've come across that during the immigration process, underpinning my policy, that in itself is a grounding of poor mental health really. Exacerbates the mental health rather than supports it, which is a huge policy issue. I know there's some very global issues here, but I'm keeping it centred to the child. You mentioned that they go through assessments, which I'm aware of. Mental health assessments can't quite get a hold of it.
Looked after children, it's all the mental health assessments for children in local authority care. I mean, obviously, different local authorities will have their own procedures, so it's not simple, but it's across the country. And we're based in the West Midlands, so that's really where we see how it's done. But a lot of it is based on self-identifying. So the question is, when a child goes for a lack medical, which every looked after child does, and a sheet of paper, strengths and difficulties, and they get to fill it out. And I've sat with a 12-year-old Afghan boy, sort of, I don't know, been in the UK about a month, and he was asked to fill out his strengths and difficulties questionnaire, which is meant to pick up on, mental emotional well-being. And I knew the boy quite well from Calais, so I had quite a good insight to how he was and is. And it was carried out in the reception, so it was a noisy, bustly reception, and it was the translator who went through it, right. The interpreter. Yeah. So there was nobody qualified. Wonderful translator, lovely guy, really child-centred, lovely guy. But again, no serious attempt to, so the child was asked, I don't know if you've seen these films, but the child's kind of asked the question, do you get angry on a scale of 1 to 10? I mean, for any child at that age to fill it out, that's a matter of opinion, isn't it? If you come from a violent background, do I get angry? Well, not compared to them, so I'm going to say no, but actually, you are very angry. So that's what the assessments for younger children, for all children in care. So, and a lot of it is self-identifying. For a lot of local authorities, it will be CAMS is the route, and I think most people are aware that is up to a 6-month wait, and postcode lottery, and actually what they can, sadly, their funding's been stripped, so that's not an easy route, and it's not immediate, and it's not targeted for these children's specific needs. There are drop-ins and various Children's Society do bits, and I don't know if there's stuff in Leicester, but there are fantastic organisations, working with young people, but they never quite really hit the mark, and they're not. I think we can kind of make some assumptions with these children. We could go crazy, and we could make some assumptions that the majority are actually suffering from a level of attachment disorder, abandonment disorder, post-traumatic stress, and general exhaustion. And I think we could kind of guess that before they got here, couldn't we? So we could prepare to receive children with some kind of service. We've seen, tragically, some horrible failures with children that we've recognised in France as having potentially psychiatric disorders, and we felt needed immediate intervention, and sadly the local authorities failed to act on it, and he, within a year of not receiving any psychological support, he'd stabbed 3 people, and this was all trauma. And he's now 16 and in the criminal justice system, which is not going to bode well for him when the Home Office come to look at his papers. And that was purely because the services weren't available to kind of step in. The priority is not there, And like I said before, the priority needs to be emotional, psychological support
from the onset then.
From the moment they arrive, and focused around that, isn't it?
Yeah, because I also read that while it seems a deep sigh of relief that someone's placed in foster care, is actually foster care parents aren't also equipped with the knowledge to identify mental health needs. It can often be a breakdown, and like say multiple moves at that point.
I think there's a similar level where we are. I think with foster caring, there's quite high levels of breakdown with British placements. So we're not, I don't, what you said, just becoming a looked after child, then your statistics of developing mental health problems suddenly go up as well, which is tragic again. But, I guess because we've had huge numbers arriving in the last couple of years, we might see a rise in placement failures with foster carers. But there's about a similar level of breakdown as well with rich kids in the West Midlands where we are. But we've noticed that yes, foster carers aren't recognising symptoms that are mental health, hoarding being one of them, and having quite high expectations of children. So, one foster carer was adamant that no food was kept in the bedroom, but the child was a hoarder, and that obviously came straight from his anxiety of not accessing food for quite a long time, so he used to stash it all under the bed. And of course the foster carer didn't recognise, she just felt it was unacceptable behaviour, and didn't recognise it as a symptom, and that actually needed to be gently kind of reassured about his food and he had access to it. So, and it is difficult, and placements are immediate, so a lot of foster carers get no warning. So they will literally get a phone call and say, you've got a spare bed, will you take this child? And suddenly I've seen numerous cases across the country in London where foster carers literally have no warning, and may have no experience of asylum-seeking children or all sorts.
Do you think that could be supported with psychoeducation support that could be fairly cost effective as well.
Can I throw something in here? In principle, yes. In principle, all of these things are marvellous ideas, and in principle, none of us would argue against throwing more support. However, the conversation that we're having now is running in an absolutely opposite direction to the trajectory of most social services now. We have an absolute hollowing out of the state, hollowing out of the public sphere, hollowing out of public services. So a lot of the problems that my good colleagues can identify are going to be made far worse, particularly after Brexit, when the divorce bill comes home, and particularly after all of that. So, and I'm sorry to be the kind of one who brings the conversation down and depressing, but we have to remember this both and all the time, both hope for the best, but recognise that where we're at the moment, if we start burdening local authorities with yet more work, what they'll do is create more assessments, right, to show that they're doing the assessing of the work, but the actual services don't get put in place, because assessment is a fantastic way that those who manage our public services are able to demonstrate that they are fulfilling government responsibility without actually doing anything. So it's that kind of do more for less money. So, the idea, the kind of ideal conversation, great, keep that going. And
this is one of the things that I see quite a lot with newly arrived young people, is the assessment first and then the care later. So particularly around age assessment. So a young person comes in and it may take months longer to do an age assessment, and social workers don't seem to be that quick on getting their education in place, the GP, the mental health support, all of that sort of thing in care in place until they've done the age assessment, because they know if they're over 18 they'll be moving on, and then they'll have spent a lot of time doing something that the young person's gone and they're not going to use. So, but we have had a number of young people, and some who have said, maybe having quite difficult times where that process has been delayed.
I mean, a lot of the system for social services and looked after children is a kind of stalling. Every 3 months we have a review, so if we want something doing, we'll talk about it in 3 months at the next review, rather than kind of addressing it and prioritising.
And I think you touched on that thing, like, so sometimes it's just like, it's bleeding obvious, it's bleeding obvious that this person is going to need mental health support, so what are we doing?
Yeah, and certainly in that situation it's cost effective, because now there's all sorts of other services have to be brought in for that child, and so there's a level of wising up and having a look, like with Dublin children, people are starting to agree. The argument for a Section 16 assessment on arrival has been asked for by all the major, like Quorum and MEECLU, and stern letters have been written. What are you doing? It's obvious you need to step in and support these families. The West Midlands, the Dublin placement, 25% breakdown of their placements. Had they stepped in when the child arrived, and the cost, those children are now in local authority care, that costs ridiculous sums of money, and they're quibbling over sending a social worker out to support the family, access financial, or get the child into education, and they're quibbling over that, and yet the end result is you now have a child under Section 20, and that is costing you huge sums of money. So I think the cogs are starting to turn slowly to go, maybe if we did agree to do the Section 17 on arrival and put that family support in, maybe we won't end up having a child under Section 20, which is huge sums of money.
I'm just going to check in with Ambrose. Ambrose, are we going to do? We're going to have some refreshments afterwards, or do we want to have some in the middle and then a few more questions, or we're not going to do refreshments?
I think we need a cup of tea somewhere, don't
What's that?
I think we need a cup of tea somewhere.
Should we have a somewhere?
Yeah.
So do people want to finish off doing a few more questions and then have a cup of tea and chat, or do people want to have a break now? What's the sort of general? I'll do show of hands for finish off and then cup of tea. That's four. And anyone who wants a cup of tea now and then a return.
Oh, got one over there.
Oh, that's like an five.
Yeah.
Oh, that was really good.
You get to decide.
Compromise about a couple of questions, then agree. Let's come back.
Can I just?
Yes,
it
you've
would
got.
really, because this is going to be. I don't know if I'm going to be able to stick around for longer.
Okay.
It would be a shame not to get good audio for any potential really good questions that might come up
Okay.
later.
Okay. So you've got that's a casting vote, I think. So shall we continue a little bit longer and aim for a cup of tea in maybe 10 minutes or so? Shall we try that? Okay. So we'll take. So there's quite a few people with their hands up, and I'd also like to say invite people. Anybody who themselves has had experience of the asylum system, if they're happy to share any experiences or want to make a comment, particularly to encourage them to do so. And anybody also who's got any ideas about what we might be able to do individually to either on an individual level to support young asylum seekers and refugees, or on a bigger scale as well. So I'll take some more questions and comments, but there's just a couple of things ahead. This gentleman, oh yes, you had your hand up for ages.
Well, mine's a kind of small question, because I'm getting slightly confused as to how this works. I'm working at the moment with quite a lot of young men asylum seekers, and some of whom, and this goes on to a conversation Alison and I just had as I walked in the room, it seems to be fairly arbitrary what age they are analysed at, if you will. So one young man that I'm working with now, I kind of assumed he was a lot older than he is. Just reading through his papers that he showed me fairly recently, it appears that he's a lot younger. And then the conversation Alison and I had just as I walked in was about a young man who we assumed was a lot younger and has now been analysed as being a little bit older. So I'm just trying to kind of get a handle on what is the, how does the system work in terms of when they arrive here as an unaccompanied minor, who decides that, where do they then go next? And presumably at the age of wherever 18 falls, they are then eligible to enter into the asylum system and claim asylum for themselves. Am I right about that?
I think,
as an adult, and then
I think
without being specific
No,
about
specific.
anybody we know.
in general, if young people arrive and they are accepted to be under 18, or they claim to be under 18, then they will go into the care of the local authority in the area, usually in the area where they were found, and that local authority will then conduct an age assessment. So that was my point about this seems to overtake any carers that they have. Now, if that young person is accepted as being under 18, they will stay in care until they're 18, and until they're 21 they'll be leaving care, a care leaver, and then they'll stay in the care system. If that young person arrives very shortly before their 18th birthday, and they've not been in care for 13 weeks, then they will be treated as, they won't get leaving care support, and then they'll go into the adult asylum system on their 18th birthday. So this is one of the issues that in this area is we've had with the DUBS arrangement. So young people have been brought over from France, not with family, but very close to their 18th birthday, and then they turn 18 and they don't get leaving care support, so they leave social services in the area where they've been living and have to move into the adult system. So if a child comes and they claim to be under 18, but social services has a different opinion, and it is really an opinion rather than proven fact, and it's thought that they were over 18 at the point they arrived, they won't be entitled to leave and care support, and then they will have to leave care care and go into the adult asylum system.
Right, and what about children who have been placed with family or
Right.
distant relatives
Right.
and then hit 18 and then have to leave those family, that family support?
It's up to the family.
doesn't it? as well?
Sorry.
It's up to the family. If you talk about, so young people that are brought over under the Dublin arrangements, the family will be responsible for looking after them. But then we've had a number of families where that child becomes 18,
Yeah.
and then they decide, well, actually, I looked after you while you were a child, you're legally an adult now, and you can go into the adult asylum system. So we've had a number of children that have then moved out of the family support, because it's like an uncle or a cousin or a brother, it's not parents, and then they've gone into the adult asylum system.
Okay.
Depending on their status at 18 though, as well.
Yeah, if they're still asylum seekers.
You know, Dublin children will arrive whatever age and claim asylum. So then if pre-18 they get an answer and it's a positive answer, they get refugee status, and whatever the relationship with the family, they'll go on like any other 18-year-old in this country. They have the right to work and they're given status and can access, you know, everything else.
Except social services support.
Yeah.
This is the issues that we've been confused.
Yes, but they can still access everything else, can't they? So, you know, a lot of social services children are accessing children's society as a point, you know, they refer all their children to the children's society anyway, and any other child can go to those provisions, you know, so if that kind of support is available. But yeah, social services, but then social services isn't available for any other British kid who has status and can go and work or go to college and everything else. So they're following that route once they've got refugee status. The ones that are worrying are the failed as children, so and that's all of them, isn't it? The unaccompanied children, Dubs being unaccompanied, but the spontaneous arrivals and Dublin, is that if they have failed, and if people have failed to appeal, which is quite common, has been quite common, and they're age 18 and they are failed asylum seekers, then you know that's when life starts to get pretty grim, because they will be going to the adult world as failed asylum seekers, so that they don't join the adult asylum seeking world. They're immediately adults who failed, which potentially is no recourse to public funds, no access.
Depends if they're already leaving care provision. At the moment, they can still access leaving care.
Not if they've failed, because are they still till 21? Failed asylum seekers.
In the provision in the new Immigration Act for that not to be the case anymore, but as far as I'm aware, that hasn't yet come into being implemented. Everyone's got so wrapped up in Brexit they've forgotten some of the nastier things that they would implement.
So it's the failed asylum seekers that potentially, particularly Dublin, because that's they don't have that's where they lose out, because they don't have access to social services.
So if they failed as a child applicant, can they lodge a fresh claim as an adult?
Yeah.
Right. Okay, that makes sense.
If they're refused as a child and they get US leave on the grounds that they're a child and can't be removed, but they don't get to stay there at 18, they should still take legal advice and try to appeal it, because what we find is quite often people solicitors are like, you've got leave, so they don't bother too much, but actually they should appeal it while they're still a child, because conditions are more favourable. And the percentage of 18-year-olds that get accepted drops massively.
Yeah, I think that's the difficulty with some of the ones we're dealing with. Not many, but just a few.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Do we have any more questions?
It was just a comment. I'm a registered social worker, and I have been a manager in an unaccompanied asylum seeking children's team in the West Midlands for quite a while. And I delivered training on some of the issues.
And I guess it was just to say that, you know, in terms of, you know, some of the presentation, you know, I accept that there are issues around social service provision at times, but there's also lots of really outstanding practice, and lots of social workers also agree with lots of the things that, you know, have been said in terms of the issues and the lack of justice towards, you know, some young people in these situations. So it was just, you know, I felt there's a bit of negativity.
Yeah,
I felt that.
I have to own it sometimes, because a lot of the work we do is picking up the pieces, and I think then when you're doing that, you're always faced with that, and of course you're not part of, oh, that's really great, and oh, that's really great, and you know, and I agree, we can get kind of locked into what doesn't go well.
I think there's a range of practice, I think that's fair enough, and I think there's some outstanding and there's some poor, and there's anywhere in between. I think that's the same for foster carers, and I think local authorities now compared to where they were 10 years ago, you know, there's been a lot of improvements, a lot of education. There's now policies that and practice guidance that didn't exist. So for example, around age assessment, you know, 10 years ago there was research, but there wasn't practice guidance. There is practice guidance for social workers to follow now, and there are, you know, there's a lot more resources than there were. And there's also an organisation, Social Workers Without Borders, which is, you know, like a pressure group, action group that, you know, lots of social workers are part of. So it was just a, you know, it was just a bit of a play. I feel like I'm defending social workers, but you know, it's just to say that, you know, there is that range. You know,
absolutely. And there's, you know, like you said, we have that tendency to notice the bad practice. Actually, one of my questions was going to be, you know, what great practice have people observed? I think we've heard some of that really good practice here as well, but it would be really good to hear like some stories of some really positive practice that people observed, and some positive stories of where, you know, refugees and asylum seekers have been supported to really make progress and have some great outcomes as well. So that would be interesting to hear. But there are other people with their hands up, so I'm just going to say that and then just carry on. As they've had hands up for a long time. Yes.
Well, my view is not less positive. Now, I don't work with unaccompanied minors. I work with accompanied minors who come here with their families, because I do family reunion. And even those children encounter major problems when they go through the educational system. There's my experience, which is quite limited, is that children who come here at primary school age actually do quite well, because before puberty, in all of these cases, because of all the countries the asylum seekers in Europe have to enter, you know, England, and particularly England, is monoglot. And there's not only a culture of being monoglot, there's also an intolerance to people who don't speak English, as we can see if we go to, you know, English holiday makers in Europe. So we actually, as a country and as a culture, have a major problem, and the addressing of that culture within the education system, particularly the secondary system, is something that I think is top priority. And my thoughts are that if these children that I deal with, who come from a supportive family background where the parents are also learning English, you know, how much more difficult it is for unaccompanied minors who don't have a parent around, and indeed quite often, you know, are placed in care. And there are extremely good statistics showing just how badly Indigenous children do when placed in care. So I actually think that unaccompanied minors get, you know, they really do get the short end of the stick in all sorts of ways. But one practical way would be a thorough assessment and then proper support in the years of secondary education.
Right. What I'm going to do is, rather than come straight back to the panel, what I'm going to do, because I think we're all getting close to wanting tea time, is just to take any more questions and comments and then have a final round up from the panel in response to all of those, if that's all right. So, yes, Penny.
Just a question for Alison. I just wondered if there were any trends with 18-year-olds being sent back to Afghanistan, you know, whether there was a quick failure, refusal of their asylum claim
Okay, so if we
with
just-
Eritrea or Afghanistan or whatever, and how you supported that, if that was the case.
So if you can just hold on to that, Alison, for a minute. Is there any other questions or comments before we finish off with the panel? Yes.
My name is Olfa. I work as interpreter, volunteer interpreter with some organization.
Sorry, Olfa, can you just say again, you volunteered? Can you just repeat, you volunteered?
As interpreter.
Interpreter,
Yeah.
excellent.
With Sudanese unaccompanied children.
Yeah.
So I remember one guy who was given in place, like a city, majority of English people. He was offered 2 houses for care, foster care. But he was not, it was not successful. He had the stigma of troublemaker, and then they moved him to Leicester with the assistance of the other local authority. I don't remember the city. Probably I don't want to say the city.
Sure.
In Leicester, he was successful. Obviously, we have the majority of Sudanese community here. The problem with this guy was the understanding. No one understood his language, what he wanted. His post-traumatic stress disorder. So his needs were different from what the authority offered him. He didn't want to play tennis or football. He wanted to have naan bread instead of toast bread. He wanted to eat as a family. And he was crying, he was 16 years old. He said, I want to eat around the table like the old age with my family who died in Sudan. He wanted to go to your supermarket and he was happy because he could find some ethnic vegetables. He didn't want to stay isolated in his room and watch TV. He said, I want to sit in the sitting room with other people. You are my mom, I want to feel like home. So obviously, they had lots of assessment. I can throw all the him. For him as a child of 16 years old, this assessment was important not because they will deal with his asylum. No, he said, all these people are here for me, and he started crying. He said, no one cared about me. So what their aim is, and what the real need of the person, there is a big gap. There should be a bridge between both aims. He is playing football now with Leicester City, and in the framework of this project. He's attending Leicester College. They offered him face-to-face teacher at home till he attended school. I think he attended last September. I was helping him every Saturday because they put him in a foster house with no communication. No one was able to speak Arabic. No one was able to speak Arabic. So they asked for help every Saturday for minor needs and some communication, basic communication between him and his mom and his siblings. He couldn't say anything except good morning. And he was accused of lying because they tell him, did you eat? He says, I didn't eat. And the foster carer was saying, I have food. But this food has nothing to do with his habits. Of course, we cannot afford everything as Sudan, but at least few basic things. So this is the conflict I've witnessed with Sudanese and children.
That's a really nice story to end on. I know it's depressing in some ways that someone's needs aren't being met, but there's also lots of examples in there about how you and others have actually helped to meet that young person's needs, and it's great to hear that he's doing a little bit better in Leicester. So that's brilliant. Thank you very much, Olfa. And I think
you had a question.
That's a good question. Go for it. Let's make this the last one.
So, I'm a family member of the EU nationality. So I have 3 children.
Yeah.
All of them have got EU nationality. I'm from Africa, and I was married, so I got divorced. So right now, for nearly 5 years now, every time I put my application into the Home Office, they've been refusing. I've been paying thousands of pounds to solicitors. So now, every time I got letters from them saying deporting me. So the last time when I saw my solicitor, he asked me to claim asylum. I don't want to claim asylum. And it's just like, according to him, they can deport me at any time. So if they deport me, my old one is 17 and my daughter is 16 and my young one is 12,
what's going to happen to them, because they don't want to live with their dad, and I'm the only one they know since there was a child. So what's going to happen to them if in case one day they just come and say, we have to deport you? So that is my question.
Thank you for sharing that. Well, let's go back to some of the experts and see if they've got anything to add into that. Is that something that you've come across before?
I don't tend to work in families, but I know there was some case law a while ago where children have rights in this situation too, and I might be worth exploring those with a solicitor.
Do you have a solicitor?
I got a solicitor. I'm just like, I'm not working, I'm not allowed to work. And on benefits, sometimes I'm on job seeker, child benefit, child tax free. And sometimes they stop my benefit because they say, oh, for them I don't have the right. So just the child tax free sometimes. They say, oh, she doesn't have the right. But according to child or job seeker or any other company, how you call it, any other companies, they still have welfare right, all of them, I got the right to stay here. As I got EU kids. So according to them, I got the right to work. But according to the Home Office, I don't have the right to stay here. So, and they know my marriage broke through domestic violence. And it's just...
You need to get specialist advice because it is unique to your case, isn't it? Every case is unique. I don't know what's available in Leicester, but I do know there's some really good support migrant resource centre in Wolverhampton, in Birmingham and Coventry. So I don't know if you're in touch, but I can give you some contact details, and they have specialist advocacy so they can discuss it legally, because I don't think any of our role is a legal role, so I couldn't offer you anything because I'm not equipped to do it, but I can certainly point you to some really good organisations, although I don't know if they are in Leicester as well, but we can find out.
I would say go to Birmingham.
But there's some really good migrant resource centre in Birmingham and Coventry, Bay Above Women's Project, and we run a project on Mondays for refugee asylum and migrant women, so you can get yourself over. I can give you some contact details.
Yeah, and good luck, best of luck. Yeah.
Just to add to Diane's been fighting this since the children have been 3, and I've been supporting her with it, and it's been on and on and on. And although we're talking about Unaccompanied Children today, it's the whole immigration system that's completely messed up. I was reading in the Observer about a 53-year-old Jamaican man who came here when he was 8, and they try and deport him back to Jamaica when he's 53. So it seems to me that the whole system needs to be overhauled. But one of the reasons Diane's come today is because she's having to go public. She's having to build a campaign around the case, because she can't be the only one in the situation. And she doesn't want to sit here waiting till her youngest children, who's now 30, is 18, and then they say, off you go back to Africa. She doesn't want that. So, do you know what I mean? If anybody wants to assist us, get in touch with Stand Up to Racism, Diare is going to be supported by us, and by anybody else that is willing to support trade, including trade unions and various things, you know what I mean? But it is a disgraceful situation. It just seems the whole immigration system is messed up and really needs a massive overhaul. Just today is the tip of the iceberg, and that's horrific. But when it goes on and on and on,
Yeah, and I'm sure there's lots of people here who are involved in lots of different organisations who would, if you wanted to go, publicise the campaign, that we could support you with that. So do sort of send it around networks, send it to Ambrose. I'm sure he'll send it around the networks here in this room, and let's start with that. Okay, I think with the tea's here. Any final words from any of the 3 of you that you'd like to?
Can I answer my question?
Yes,
It was a short one.
You asked about deportations to Afghanistan.
Yeah.
I think when After 18 first started, which was 2013, that was one of the primary concerns that we had, was that the Afghan young people had only discretionary leave to stay until they were 18, and then were all being removed. Since then, in our area, we seem to have seen a drop in the number of young Afghans that we work with now. So our demographic has completely shifted. So we've had much more Eritreans, and now it's mostly Sudanese young people. And the acceptance rate for asylum for Sudanese and Eritreans is much higher than it was and has been for Afghans. So the issues around deportation to Afghanistan, while we worked quite intensively on them a few years ago, touch wood, that seems to, in this community, it seems to be a lot less of a, it still happens, I think, but it's a lot less of an issue now than it was a while ago. The Eritreans, recently we've seen a decrease in the number of those getting status, but that's been challengeable. In our experience, they've gone on to appeal and have been successful, and the Sudanese seem to find it a bit easier to get their status than the Afghans have done. So the only deportation that I've dealt, or potential deportation that I've been dealing with recently, has been an Eritrean young person who was fingerprinted in another European country, and was expected to go back to that country to have an asylum claim heard. So yeah, so it's quite nice.
That's good to know.
Not to have to be doing trips to Morocco all the time.
Thank you.
Quite difficult stuff. So.
Any last words from Judy?
Can I throw a philosophical one, a slightly more philosophical one? I think the thing that I've really been struck by listening to the questions and the comments and my esteemed colleagues next to me is that we're talking constantly about what is it that the state, our government, ought to do for children and young people. I mean, I know we've been focusing on unaccompanied minors, but in many senses they just become a test case for what happens when governments fail, when they don't recognise the very specific needs. And so I think I'd just like to end on that slightly more philosophical note, really.
I think we can stay with the philosophical.
Yeah, we'll stay with that. Well, I just wanted to say a massive thank you to the panel and to Ambrose and to everyone in the audience who've come up with some brilliant questions and comments, and to this gentleman whose name I don't know but vaguely recognise. who's doing this recording, which is brilliant, thank you. And yeah, just thank you, and maybe we'll all see each other on the Stand Up to Racism March on the coach on the 17th of March, so that we can all take part in having a voice heard about immigration and refugees and lots of other things as well. So thank you very much to everybody.